Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
So good morning.
Good morning. Thursday morning, third day of the inquiry. We have heard from the highway witnesses for both the appellant and the council, and we heard yesterday from the council's witness on planning, general planning matters and layout and design. So it is the turn of the appellant's witness this morning. Good morning to you, Mrs. Charles, to do the same. Before we do that, I've got a couple of items of housekeeping I just wanted to raise. Firstly, I just wanted to check as far as the mitigation land and SPA issues are concerned, that the latest consultation response from Natural England is the one which was by an email. It was dated the 26th of August. It's down as CD 57 in the core document list. I just wanted to make sure that that was the latest one, that there hasn't been any subsequent one. I'm assuming that is the case, but if it isn't, please let me know. Looking through my files yesterday evening, I don't think that's actually being forwarded on to the council. It's not appended to the addendum statement of common ground. So could please the council arrange for a copy of that to be sent to the PINS case officer, just to make sure I've got my records up to date?
Yes, I can confirm that that is the right one.
It is. Okay. Yeah.
We'll make sure that goes to PINS as well.
Okay, thank you so much. The other matter was, Mr. Warren, you announced yesterday that you would be making a cost application. Are you intending to make your written submission today?
I am, sir. Yes. Okay. So if you're happy, I'll do the same as I suggested. It won't be very long. I'll put it in writing and send it to Mr. Defer as soon as I can when we've closed this afternoon.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So on that, I'll wait and see what it says, but realistically, I might not be in a position to respond in writing before we close tomorrow. I've had other matters that I've had to deal with over the last couple of evenings, work matters, which means that closings will be filling most of my evening. And so I think realistically, I will need to do it on Friday afternoon, if that's okay, sir.
That has to be the case. That has to be the case. I mean, the way I was thinking was that obviously I'm expecting Mrs. Charles' evidence and cross-examination to probably take this morning, and then this afternoon there's a round table on conditions and the legal undertaking. I'm not anticipating actually taking very much time on either of those things. I've got some relatively straightforward questions to ask. If either of you two gentlemen wish to get on with writing closings rather than attend those two round table cases, I won't be offended.
Very grateful.
That's kind, sir. Thank you. I mean, I think, as you say, we're not likely to be very long doing those, so it should be okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay, that's fine. Good. Okay. Is there any other housekeeping matters that anybody wishes to raise?
So can I just raise one housekeeping matter, and that's on the 106, the national undertaking. You asked us yesterday to do two things. Obviously, we'll cover this later in the session, but I just want to flag it now to check that we were happy with the title and to check that we were happy with the final version of the 106. On title, my instructing solicitor has had discussions with the appellant, and we're satisfied with all of that, as can be explained later if need be. On the substance of the 106, again, happy with that. In reviewing the final version of the 106, my instructing solicitor has noticed, I think, 5 typographical errors or anomalies, which we at least wish to draw to your attention. We drew them to the attention of the appellant solicitors yesterday afternoon, and I understand that they don't think that those matters are problematic, and no doubt they can be discussed, but I just want to raise with you that there'll be 5 issues that we're just going to run through. They're very short points, sir, and obviously for you to express a view on or take a view on them as you see fit.
Okay. Thanks for flagging that up. Okay, in which case we come to the editor in chief of Ms. Charles. Mr. Warren, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Charles, let me say good morning to you first of all. Morning.
Good morning.
Just checking your sound apart from anything else.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear and see you okay. Fingers crossed we don't have too much freezing today. Let me introduce you, and then we'll take about 45 minutes, I guess, just running through 6 short topics relating to the cramped development allegation. So, Ms. Charles, first of all, your name is Karen Charles, is that right?
Yes, correct.
And you're a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and you've been a member since 1998, is that right?
It is.
And you set out in your proof at page 3 your academic qualifications and your 25 or thereabouts years experience in planning. And your head, after having spent about 20 years at DTZ Cushman's, you have been director at Boyer for what, the past 5 years?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Thank you very much. You obviously set out what you deal with, mainly reason 2 and the point about the kickabout area, and also policy and planning balance and so on in your proof. So yes, we'll take it in that order. I think we'll just start with an introductory loosener, which is about the reason for refusal itself on cramped development, which you inspectors familiar with by now, but you set it out, don't you, in your proof. And I wanted to ask you about the wording and what you think the scope of it really was. You've got it, for instance, at page 12, haven't you? At 4.6 of your proof, in case people want to remind themselves. Proposed development would result in an unacceptable cramped form of development in relation to the site area, and as such would be contrary to policy EM10. So what have you, at the time and since, what have you made of the reason for refusal?
Thank you. As I read it, the reason for refusal is very narrow and very specific. It's clear that one of the reasons for refusal 2 was that simply were too many homes in perhaps a too small area, which alludes to density, doesn't refer to density, doesn't refer to overdevelopment. But I think it's quite narrow and quite clear that the perception is there are too many homes on too small a site.
And did that accord with your understanding of what occurred at the meeting, if you like, and the discussion of the members, or not?
It did. I didn't attend the committee, although I've seen it back on the recording on YouTube. My colleague attended, and of course Bewley attended. But yes, there was discussion around a number of matters. But in relation to this point, there was a suggestion, I think, that this would be overdevelopment, but it was considered that was the wrong terminology, and it was agreed to refer to it as cramped development.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, let's dive straight into it, and I've got, as I said, five or so points for you on it, stemming from the evidence that Mr. Butterworth gives to support that reason for refusal. And the first is the point about suburban character or suburban layout. I wonder whether we should just get one of the relevant drawings open while we're doing these points, Ms. Charles, just to have it in front of us. We were looking at your Appendix 2 much of the time with Mr. Butterworth yesterday. Should we open that one? Is that,
yes, I've got that here.
Great.
That's the one showing the different landscape areas.
Yes, it's the one with the landscape areas, and we could look at the landscape drawing itself in due course. But in terms of the layout, this is probably as good as any. So you heard Mr. Butterworth's evidence. You've read what he said. He makes a point about the layout being suburban and drawing an adverse inference from that, or characterising that in a negative way. Well, what's your reaction to that point?
The development very much reflects the location. the village location, the edge of village location. It also deals with the need to make efficient use of the land, and has regard to other developments, more modern developments that have taken place within the village. The village has grown over time. It's got a historic core. It's got post-war development. It's got development really from all periods. Most recently, Overton Hill, perhaps Twoggate Lane. And this is not dissimilar in style and character to what is proposed elsewhere. It is a good, appropriately density modern development.
You said Twoggate Lane. Did you mean Twoggate Meadow?
Sorry, yes, Twoggate Meadow.
I'm always doing that. Twoggate Meadow, just across the other side of Twoggate Lane, and we can see a bit of the layout, obviously, of Twoggate Meadow on that drawing, can't we? And we'll come back to the aerial photograph of the area in a moment. Thank you. I had an exchange with Mr. Butterworth about the SPD yesterday. To which he'd referred in his proof and in his evidence in chief. And if you recall, we looked at that point about rural development and so on.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything about that particular aspect of
this? This is a site on the edge of a village. It's allocated for housing. It's not an isolated rural development. I think the layout is entirely appropriate. I don't think it doesn't necessarily reflect a rural style. It doesn't necessarily reflect a suburban style. It's a style appropriate to the location.
Yeah, and there's just one final point on that. In terms of suburban, the way that if you're looking at the drawing, Miss Charles, the way that the units themselves are disposed largely in perimeter blocks, and the way that they front the streets, or the proposed streets, is what do you want to say about that in terms of whether that's, in inverted commas, suburban or not?
It could be perceived as suburban, but it's a good layout. It is homes with perimeter blocks. Perimeter blocks is a character defined by the SPD, and in fact referred to in the biodiversity SPD as well. We have a mix of homes fronting the streets, fronting side roads, and fronting the open space.
Yes. Thank you. So suburban layouts. Second point, very much related to that. I mean, it's almost a subcategory of it, really. Is the point that Mr. Butterworth makes about the number or the amount of houses or units that are joined to each other. Yes. If you remember this point about how 50% being, attached to another unit, if you like, at least another unit. What do you make of that point?
Well, he's reporting on the fact there are 50% homes are detached. These are modest detached houses with reasonable gardens, and of course the consequence is that there are 50% that are attached to another building. Now we know we've got a few apartments, we've got a few rows of small terraces, and then we've got some semi-detached houses. And the semi-detached houses actually have the added benefit of providing space between them, larger spaces between them, and effectively reducing the built form. So I think actually it helps reduce the cramped nature of development by having those gaps. Yes,
you mean the gaps between the pairs of semis?
Between the pairs of semis. If you have, for example, 4 detached houses versus 4 semis, you've got, by bringing the 2 blocks together in pairs, you create more space between them.
And just looking at obviously it's a question of 3D and on the site, but just using the plan as a guide, what do you ask the inspector to make of the, as it were, the scale and form of any of these conjoined buildings?
They are a modern, a modest scale to reflect what people want to buy and what the local need is within the area.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. There's also just, I guess, connected to that, though strictly speaking, it's not a point about how it looks, but why it is the way that it's designed. There's no dispute between the parties, I know, about affordable housing and about mix of types, but just say a word about how that's affected the scheme, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. There is no objection on mix, and that's the mix of 1, 2, 3 beds, 4, 5. There's also a requirement here to provide 40% affordable housing, and there's no objection on that point. In order to provide a mix of homes and a mix of affordable homes, then inevitably there's a requirement to provide some smaller units as well as larger detached homes. So we end up with a good mix across the whole site of both sizes, tenures, and types of homes.
Great. I'm not going to ask you about architecture and so on, because that's, the inspector can look at that and it's not an issue in dispute between the parties. Thank you. Third point, again, an aspect of layout and approach is the point that Mr. Butterworth made about interlocking or joining on to the backs of rows of existing houses, if you remember that point. And I asked him about Overton Hill and about this particular situation. We can see obviously from the drawing that none of the houses or units does that here, backs up, as it were, to the back of an existing house in the area. What's been the rationale for that?
I think there are 2 areas to look at here. There's the area along Twoggate Lane, first of all. Twoggate Lane, as you are aware, is it's a road, but it's actually an important biodiversity corridor. There's a need to provide a buffer and an offset to that, so homes are pulled away from that edge, and the homes actually front onto that green space, which is a good form of urban design. Actually, to have gardens backing on, as they've done in Twoggate Meadow, whilst I don't, disagree that that's necessarily the wrong approach, there's a better approach with having homes fronting onto that green space from a security point of view, and also a biodiversity point of view. So I think it would be entirely inappropriate along Twoggate Lane to have homes backing on. We then look at the area of homes where the gardens back onto the site along Waltham Road. Now, we don't have homes along that boundary. We have the Suds, which effectively backs onto it. Had we had homes that were abutting the back gardens of those homes, then that's entirely what we would have done. But in this case, we don't have homes along there. Of course, it's not a policy requirement, it's an SPD guidance point. And of course, if you look across our site, our back gardens are interlocking, proposed interlocking. They just don't interlock with the homes surrounding us.
Yeah. Okay. And yes, I'm with you. I don't think I need to ask any more about that. The fourth point, we were just dwelling, as it were, no pun intended, on the area of the western portion of the site where the Suds and the Kickabout area is, and just describing what goes on there. I think, again, pretty much connected to the central point that Mr. Butterworth makes is his point about the Kickabout area. Now, there are 2 aspects to this I want to explore. The first is general layout and what's good to be where, as it were, on the site, and then there's the specific point about residential amenity of existing occupiers. So in terms of where this should be, or where it's best to be, or whether putting it here would cause harm as opposed to putting it somewhere else, what do you say about all of that?
The best location for a Kickabout area is an area where it will receive the best use. It'll be an area which has natural surveillance, so it's safe for those choosing to use it, and will enable people to feel safe when they are using it, so it'll improve its use. So the location was chosen to benefit not only the proposed residents, but also the existing residents. It's very important just to recognise what this is. This is an area of grass. There is some planting around the edge. There is an e-rail around the front to prevent cars parking on it, for example. But it's an open area of managed green space, which will actually help in reducing the cramped nature of the development. Yes,
and you say the benefit of those proposed residents, if you like, on the site and neighbours. Just say a word about how you envisage it being used by residents of Twoggate Meadow or Waltham Road, etc.
I think it's very much used informally. It's used as an area where someone might want to kick a ball with a friend, It's not used for sports matches. It's not used formally. It's very much used informally.
And what do you think the situation would be? Would it be the same, or would it be different? And if so, in what respect? If this kickabout area was in the other corner, was in the far southeast corner of the site, what would it be like if it was up there?
Well, it'd be more exposed because it's on slightly higher ground. It would possibly have less surveillance, less natural surveillance, and it would be more detached from the homes it serves and the existing homes. So I think actually this is a much preferable location.
I mean, more detached from the existing homes. If it were there, to what extent do you think it would be used by residents of Tewgate Meadow, for instance?
I think there'll be, where it is, will get better use.
Yes.
By putting it on the edge, I think many people would not perhaps even know it's there. They wouldn't use it. Or the inside, it'd have less use. It'd have less use.
Yeah. When you say the edge, you mean the southeastern corner,
Yes.
do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And I think it's probably worth, before we go to the residential amenity point, just reflecting on that kickabout area and the other, because there's one other suds area, isn't there, which is open space, and then the little triangular green, if you like, and then there's the buffer planting that I'm looking at down the eastern boundary with a footpath and so on through it. What do these do in terms of the council's concern? Mr. Butterworth's concerned about cramping.
Well, by positioning different types of open space integral to the development, it does quite the reverse of what the council's concern is. It does break up the development and will reduce the perception of the development appearing cramped, because as you pass through the development, you're passing between areas of green space and areas of built form.
I wonder whether, just before we go to residential amenity, sorry, I keep saying we're about to go there, we could just have a look at core document 26, which is the landscape master plan, just a tiny bit easier to envisage this without. Do you have that, sir? Core document 26 is the one that's slightly awkward to find in the in the list.
Oh, I think I might have that down there. 26. And I'm having difficulty finding it. Where else are we?
I think it's about 2/3 of the way down.
So I also had difficulty finding it this morning. It is
in there
randomly between CD 13 and CD 15.
Yes, I've got you.
I had the same problem this morning.
I mean, let's face it, it's exactly where you'd expect core document 26. I don't know why you're complaining. It's absolutely fine.
Okay, I have it up. Thank you.
Okay, do you have it, sir? Great. Do you have that, Ms. Charles?
I do, yes.
Yeah, great. And so the only other things I just wanted to use this to draw attention to and ask for your comment on, Ms. Charles. Obviously, this shows the gardens of the houses themselves, as well as that pedestrian and cycle route through the middle of the site.
It does, yes.
With the street trees and so on noted on it, as well as the proposed planting in the buffer areas around the edges of the site. And it might be worth just reflecting on the overall effect as you see it of that planting and the gardens as well. Would you mind doing that for a moment? How would that appear?
This is a very useful drawing to look at. We did spend quite a lot of time yesterday looking at the open space drawing, which doesn't benefit from showing where tree planting and different characters of those open spaces will be. I think you can see from this landscape master plan just how broken up the built form is by different characters of green spaces, whether they are the pedestrian cycle link through the centre, the buffer, the large buffer along the edge with footpath moving through it, to both the suds ponds and the kickabout areas. So I think you can see from this actually that the huge amount of green space and how that breaks up the built form. The added benefit of this drawing, unlike one of them we were looking at yesterday, is this also shows the garages coloured in as built form. And I think there was a relevant point yesterday that the garages were not shown coloured on the plan we were looking at. This one very much does that. So you can see the full extent of built form and the significant amount of landscaping that is proposed around it.
Yeah, and in the normal way, what this doesn't show, because it's a landscaping scheme for the overall development, is any tree planting or anything like that within the gardens that would be sold, obviously, in the main privately. But what could one expect about the effect of the appearance of those residential gardens when they are occupied?
Well, once people occupy the homes and choose to plant them, then that will, further improve the greenery and the landscaping across the site. You can see an example of that, for example, in Tugate Meadow and other houses surrounding it, as to what they choose to do.
Yes, yeah, I mean, we can see some of that in the aerial photograph. Yeah, thank you. And in terms of this is quite a useful image before we leave it for those last 2 points. The first is a harsh urban edge. I asked Mr. Butterworth about this, so there's not a huge amount to go back on, but just so that we've got your view on the record, Mr. Charles, what do you say about whether this scheme here would leave us or leave Overton with a harsh urban edge in this location?
I think it's clear from this drawing that it doesn't deliver a harsh urban edge. We've got two principal edges to this development, one along the east side where we've got homes fronting the buffer, the green space, an open space along that edge, and there's actually a variety of built forms, some set forward, some set back, but it's not a sort of solid harsh urban edge. And then we have the southern edge, which it's not linear, it's curved. It's dominated by detached homes, homes set back from the landscape edge. So again, I think offers a soft urban edge to the countryside beyond.
And we can't see all of it, but we can see the edge of the full extent of the field, if you like, not the scheme or the allocated area, just to the south there. In terms of any views in from outside of the edge that would be created by the scheme, to what extent would it be particularly visible from outside?
Well, you'd see if you were stood in the field. It would be an agricultural field. You would see the development. There was proposed tree planting. There will be a fence line, a sort of agricultural type fence line along the edge. But you will see the urban form beyond it. But it's at a lower level, of course, because of the way that the land falls away towards Overton. And
then what about if you were south of the existing tree and hedge buffer to the south of the whole field? Can you see in from there? I mean, it's actual see this on the site, but you've been there, Ms. Charles.
I have been there. I don't believe you would see it. It is quite a dense and deep tree line. You may see glimpses of development if you're close up, and it's in the winter time. But actually, the existing buffer that exists to the east and to the south will provide a significant amount of screening to this proposed development.
Thank you. And then finally, after much delay, the point about use of the kickabout area and impacts on Moor Farm and on a couple of 3 or 4 houses in Waltham Road. What do you say about that?
I don't think there will be significant concerns around amenity here. There are standards within the local plan and the SPD for kickabout areas, the size they should be, and the offset that should be provided, and we meet and exceed those standards.
Sorry, Ms. Charles, sorry to interrupt. I was talking in a rather unspecific way yesterday with Mr. Butterworth about this area. We know that there's planting along the edge. When you say buffer around the kickabout, what's that?
So there's a requirement for 1,600 square metres of kickabout area, and that is a rectangle. That rectangle is invisible. The rectangle effectively sits within that northern part, which is identified here as a kickabout area. So there's a rectangle that has to meet a minimum standard. Around that, you have to have an additional 10 metres before the front edge of buildings to provide enough offset, and we meet those standards.
And when you say enough offset, what's the purpose, as you understand it, of that guidance or that policy requirement about offset? What's it for?
It's to protect residential amenity, for dealing with a stray ball, or for avoiding too much noise disturbance.
Yeah. And then if we're very specific about the houses that are would be closest to that kickabout area, what's your planning judgment about whether they would suffer an unacceptable degree of impact?
I don't believe they would. There is proposed planting along the fence line, the rear gardens of those homes.
Yeah.
That will prevent. There was a comment yesterday about balls banging against fences. That really won't happen because of the landscaping along those edges. I'm not saying that if there's a child playing with its dad, kicking a ball around there, that they won't hear that. But it would be no different to what you would hear in someone's residential garden.
Yeah. All right. And then I think finally on that, undesirable antisocial activities in that area, whether it's sufficiently surveilled or managed. What do you say about those concerns, I think, that Mr. Butterworth was expressing?
Well, the position of it actually helps that by having homes that front onto that space. People will undertake antisocial behaviour where they're not overseen. Where they know that somebody's watching them, they're unlikely to undertake such activities. So I think the position of this actually improves the chances of minimising antisocial behaviour.
Thank you very much. And then final point on cramped and so on is the connected points about topography and views. Is seen in context, Ms. Charles. First of all, we know that there's a fall across the site of 5, 6, 7 meters, I think maximum, if you take it right at the top down right to the bottom. What do you say about the way that the scheme is proposed to be laid out on that, and as to whether it's contextually appropriate or harmful?
Yep, the homes are positioned on the lower part of the site. I do accept that homes extend slightly further south than the indicative line shown on the neighbourhood plan, but it's all very much within the blue dotted line, which forms part of the allocation. So it's on the lower ground, and therefore will have reduced visual impact than if we pushed all of the homes up to the other end. There'd be no suggestion, and it would not be sensible to do that.
When you say the other end, sorry, Ms. Charles.
The complete southern end. So as you're aware, this is if you look at the neighbourhood plan allocation as a whole with the blue dotted line, if all of the homes, for example, were chosen to be at the southern end and you had a large gap between the two, that would be on higher ground and wouldn't make sense. But we do have homes up to Twoggate Lane, and they are on the lower ground.
Yes. And what about the visual effect of seeing the homes that are proposed in the locations that they're proposed on the plan, seen in the context of Overton?
They will appear in exactly the same way that the existing development appears from the surrounding area. We've already spoken about the woodland buffer that exists along the east and southern edge, which will provide a lot of screening. You really won't have distant views. It's important, I think, to remember here, this is a site that's allocated for housing. It's not a site that's in the countryside, protected green belt, protected AONB, valued landscape. It has been identified as an agricultural field, which is appropriate for housing development.
Yeah. And when you say it would appear just like the other homes, just so that the inspector can bear this in mind when he does his site visit on Monday, what other bits of Overton in particular are you thinking of when you say that it's similar?
Well, views perhaps of Twoggate Meadow, views of Waltham Road, also areas like Overton Hill, where you can see them from the surrounding area.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, you've covered views, I think. Do you have a different view from, no pun intended, from the one that Mr. Butterworth expressed to the inspector when the inspector asked him at the end of his evidence whether there are any other views than the ones from Twoggate Lane in effect, and glimpsed views through between the houses on Waltham Road? Are there any other views that you think the inspector should look at to judge this?
I mean, I would encourage the inspector to try and see this site from various different parts of the village. We've not undertaken an LVIA. It wasn't required, and so it hasn't been done. But from site visits and from looking at this site from the surrounding area, I don't believe you will see the site in any significant form. because
Yeah,
of
all right.
because the way that the area is characterised by having mature tree boundaries along roads in the wider area.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean, so just breaking out of the examination in chief for a moment, we haven't talked about any itinerary of a wider site visit for you. It's partly for that reason. We're not debating views from particular locations outside the immediate surrounds of the site. So we weren't really intending to give you a kind of walk around.
No, I see no reason to do so. But, the inspector will make his own decision.
Sure.
And Mr. Butterworth has not identified any particular long distance views that should be considered.
No, that's fine. I'll be making notes on as comments come along as to points of interest that I need to include in my site visit. So that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So finally, Ms. Charles, overall view, please, before we go to planning balance, about whether the proposed development will be cramped in relation to the area that it occupies, the site area, or indeed cramped in general?
No, I don't believe for a moment that this is a cramped development. It's a density of less than 25 dwellings per hectare, which is a low density for any kind of modern development. It reflects the village character, it reflects the edge, and there's significantly more open space proposed than would be required by minimum local plan standards. So I don't think for a moment that this is a cramped development.
Thank you. Now, obviously, that conclusion would finds its way in your written evidence into your overall planning balance.
Yes.
And as does, I'll be forgiven for leading your reliance on Mr. Burbridge's evidence, I think, on highways. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, entirely.
Bearing those points in mind, two questions. First of all, let's start with the basics. Section 38.6. Would the scheme comply with the provisions of the development plan seen as a whole?
Yes, absolutely. We look at CN9 and we look at EM10 in particular as policies, and I have no doubt that the development is in accordance with the development plan, both in relation to those policies and as a whole. And
so obviously the full set of considerations notwithstanding that includes compliance or otherwise with the NPPF. I can lead you on, there's a tilted balance here and we know what the test is. What do you make of the tilted balance here? How does it work?
If we were reliant entirely on the tilted balance, then looking at the benefits relative to the very limited harm, I think that there's a clear case that there are significant planning benefits that outweigh that harm, and therefore the tilted balance would be engaged and planning permission should be granted.
All right, thank you. On that note, so that's the end of our examination in chief with Ms. Charles. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one question of fact of Mrs. Charles now?
Yes.
The parties are agreed that tilted balance is engaged. Mr. Butterworth yesterday referenced, in terms of scale of under provision on 5-year housing land supply, he referenced a fairly recent appeal decision, which I think was 4.11 to 4.85, something at a range of that order. Do you have any disagreement with that range? Is that something that you are both agreed that the housing land supply is somewhere in that range?
I think that's probably the case. We have not, we've not tested it in detail, and we don't see any reason to dispute that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Defer, would you like to proceed with your cross-examination?
Thank you, sir. And good morning, Ms. Charles. I don't think we'll need to take all of the time that I indicated, but famous last words, I'm hoping we can cover things pretty shortly. The reason for refusal too has been well explored in many ways. Obviously, you heard from Mr. Butterworth yesterday, and you heard our points on that. I'm not proposing to put all of those to you. The inspector has those. The inspector has heard what you have to say in response, and ultimately the inspector will need to form a view on that. That's right, isn't it? Grateful. So let me just start then with the development plan policy basis for reason for refusal 2, if I may, and that is EM10.
Yes.
EM10 is a policy which is a policy, forgive me, which provides a framework for securing high quality design, essentially. Yeah,
That's right. Yes.
And in doing so, in seeking high quality design, I don't think there's anything between us. That is a objective which is consistent with national planning policy. National planning policy also seeks to secure high quality design.
Absolutely.
And so,
yes.
In broad terms, there is consistency between the way the development plan approaches things and the way national policy approaches things.
Yes, I agree. That's right.
Grateful. When one is coming to the question of considering high quality design and considering issues of design, layout, that sort of thing, those are quintessentially issues which are replete with planning judgments. They are you as a planner have to make judgments all the time, and design is one aspect where that really comes into its own.
It is, but we do all benefit from planning guidance, other planning and design-based documents to support that process.
Absolutely, and both you and Mr. Butterworth has covered those documents in your evidence. You take different views on their application to this particular scheme, but you've both considered those documents and highlighted the bits that you think are relevant to the inspector. Yeah. And then the inspector will need to go away and form his own view on those matters that essentially are between you.
He will, yes.
And I just want to deal with a point that started to be put to Mr. Butterworth yesterday, perhaps put fully to Mr. Butterworth yesterday, and that is the issue of the role of the committee in reaching its decision, because we know that the committee had before it advice from officers on matters of design, which it disagreed with.
Yes, the design office, the urban design officer, supported the development.
Yeah, the subject to conditions, there was no objection in the end. Absolutely. No. And that was set out in the committee report, and no reason to think that the committee weren't aware of that position.
That's right.
But as the people elected to make that decision, they are free, aren't they, to disagree with that advice?
It's their democratic right to disagree, although they do benefit from having the planning officer's recommendation and the advice of all consultees, and of course in this case the urban design officer, which Absolutely. They should take into consideration when making that decision.
Absolutely, and equally the inspector has before him the views that were reported in the committee report, has before him the views that you've reported to him.
Yes.
And he has the view reported by Mr. Butterworth to him. And he is equally free to have regard to those views, but reach his own view on it.
He does, and of course the benefit of design guidance within, or design guidance and policy. Yes. Absolutely.
Taking into account the development plan policies, national planning policy framework, the SPD, the national planning guidance that we've looked at, taking all that into account, he'll come to his own conclusion.
He will.
And he is free, isn't he, to come to the conclusion that he thinks is the right one. Yeah?
He is, yeah.
Regardless of whether he might think that somebody else might reach a different view.
Yes, it is the inspector's decision, having regard to all of the information in front of him, to make that decision, yes.
And it seemed to be being put to Mr. Butterworth yesterday, and perhaps I'm mischaracterising the submission that was being, or the question that was being asked to him, but it would seem to be being put that the committee should only really refuse on design matters if they think that that's the only reasonable design conclusion to come to. But that's not right, is it? I mean, if the committee comes to a view which they think are reasonable, they're perfectly entitled to refuse it on that basis, aren't they?
Well, they are, but I will reiterate my point that committee should, they have to have regard to those planning policies in the same way that the planning officer and the design officer does when making their judgments, and the inspector in his judgment.
Yeah, and the planning policy is obviously the reason for refusal makes reference to the development plan. It makes reference to the SPD in particular.
Yes.
And Mr. Butterworth has explored pretty fully, I suggest to you in his evidence, that context, that development plan context, the SPD and national policy and national guidance on design. So it's not a case of people not having regard to those documents. It's a case of people coming to different views on them.
It appears that they have come to a different view than that of the urban design officer, of myself and the planning officer. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. And when one is coming, I'm not going to deal with this, but when one's thinking about design issues, one doesn't just say, well, okay, it's a low density scheme, so that must be okay. Nothing between us that it is a low density scheme, but you wouldn't say that any low density scheme on this site would be acceptable.
A poor quality low density scheme would be unacceptable. I agree with that, but there is no disagreement between us on the design of the homes.
No, and it's absolutely helpful to identify where there are areas of agreement, and that was pretty fully canvassed, if I may say, by Mr. Warren and Mr. Butterworth yesterday, and I think you'll agree that was a very clear exchange between them as to where there are issues of agreement and where there are issues of disagreement.
I agree with that. There were significant areas of agreement in that exchange. Yes, absolutely,
and for that reason, I'm not going to go through all of those areas again, forgive me, because I think that exercise has been done in a way, and the inspector is probably pretty clear in his mind as to where there are these issues of disagreement. Sorry. I think working at home has not got long left as a sensible occupation. Unfortunately, the commute is about 2 hours. The thing where I wanted to go to next are just a few of the points that you were making in your evidence this morning, if I may. And just to deal with some of those. So, I mean, I don't mind whether we have the plan at the back of your appendices out, or the one in the landscape plan that you took us to earlier.
I've got them both open on a second screen, so whichever you prefer.
Lovely. Well, I tell you what, I think you prefer, and I'm very happy with this, core document 26, because one gets a bit of a better sense of where there's green.
Yes, I agree.
One gets a bit of a better sense where there's, as you said, the garages are drawn in, and it's just perhaps a little bit easier to understand what's going on. And of course, one can see the gardens labelled. And if I just take a few of these points, the kickabout area to start with, you have expressed your view, consistent with what was said in the committee report, that the kickabout area is well located because it will serve both the existing occupiers and it will serve the proposed development. Yeah,
it will. That's right.
And so for that reason, that's one reason why you put a tick in the column of it should go where it's been proposed, and that's one of the features that you say is a positive aspect of where it is.
It was shown indicatively in the neighbourhood plan as that a kickabout area should be provided, and I think it came really provisionally from that Taylor Wimpey plan that was used for the purposes of securing the allocation in the first place. But the location was never fixed, and it gave us the opportunity to consider where the best location might be to provide it. And for us, clearly the best location was central, so it can have the benefit of for the benefit of the existing residents, but also the new residents. And actually, by locating it integrally within the development, it actually helps reduce the cramped nature of the development.
Yeah, well, you like it, if I put it this way, you like it in the sort of top left-hand corner of the site. Mr. Butterworth has explained why he thinks it would be better located, and he's put some, if I can put it this way, there are some crosses that go in the box of why it's poorly located if it's up in the top left-hand corner, and some ticks which say why it's better located down towards the bottom right-hand corner as one looks at the page. And what one is dealing with in those situations are questions of judgment. So, for example, it's true, isn't it, that if it wasn't where it's proposed, one could have a relationship of back-to-back relationship with the existing dwellings, particularly the existing dwellings. You make the point that the proposed dwellings have back-to-back relationships, but one could achieve back-to-back relationships with existing dwellings. And Mr. Butterworth's point is that that was something that national guidance indicates as a positive. And he described it, I think, as there's a missed opportunity.
We could have had homes that had their gardens backing onto the existing homes on Nightingale Close and Waltham Road. We could have done that, and that would have been a reasonable design solution. Actually, by proposing the green space where we have new built form further away from existing residents to their advantage.
Well, yeah, one looks at it in two ways, and this is where it all sort of comes down to judgment calls. You say it's to their advantage. Mr. Butterworth points to his concerns about, the impact, as it were, of having a green space there, from, for example, locating a potential source of antisocial behaviour towards the rears of gardens where they might not be as well surveilled, is the point that he makes.
I don't believe for a minute this is going to be a location for antisocial behaviour. There are homes that front onto this space. It's not a vast area of green space. It's an appropriate area of green space. It doesn't have a playground and other facilities within it, which would naturally encourage people to use it for antisocial behaviour.
Okay, well, green spaces, fact of life, I'm afraid, are used. There doesn't need to be a particular provision to encourage antisocial behaviour to occur. It is something that will happen with relatively informal spaces.
It could happen anywhere, but that's not a reason not to provide open space within
No. I'm not saying that, but when one thinks about the location of it, one often thinks about having development which fronts onto it, which I appreciate some of the existing development does, but one also has development which backs on existing development which backs onto it. Yeah, it
does. I mean, those homes do back onto it. We've got landscaping along the edge, so there would not be a concern about people, for example, jumping over the back fences to collect a ball or to commit a crime, for example. So it is, it's appropriately landscaped from a safety point of view. But I don't consider for a moment that that's going to result in antisocial behaviour. By putting it out on the periphery where it is less visible, it's more likely to encourage that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's being provided along that edge, just looking at the plan, is referred to as a mix of native trees, hedges and flower meadows. I mean, it's not a, you say there aren't concerns about jumping over the back gardens, and that may well be right, but the landscaping itself wouldn't prevent that, would it?
No, I don't think. I mean, if someone wants to do that, nothing's going to prevent them other than barbed wire, and no one's going to suggest that. No. It would discourage that.
And if one were to put the location of the kickabout area, for example, where Mr. Butterworth indicates it would be better suited, down in the bottom right-hand corner, there would be, I think you fairly acknowledge, some benefits that come with that. You explained it would have better views. I think you agree with Mr. Butterworth on that point.
So what do you mean by better views?
Well, have views towards open countryside, whereas I think where it's located, it's not going to have those views. And again, Mr. Butterworth took you to the SPD, which talked about providing local green space with views.
Yeah, I agree that, by providing it where we have, there won't be obvious open views to the countryside. But this is a countryside edge development, and people can appreciate open views, for example, from other parts of the green space around the site. I don't see that as a major disadvantage to its current location.
And it would also be very possible to design it so that one didn't have rear gardens backing onto the green space. If it was that, the proposed rear gardens wouldn't need to back onto it. One could have frontage development around the green space, couldn't one?
Could have done.
Yeah. And that would provide a better relationship, I would suggest to you, between the proposed dwellings and the proposed green space, as opposed to the existing dwellings and the proposed green spaces we see now.
I'm not sitting here saying to you that by putting the kickabout area where it was shown in the neighbourhood plan would have been entirely unacceptable in planning terms. I'm not saying that. I think, in my view, where we have got it here, it's an entirely appropriate design and layout approach to the location for that kickabout area.
Well, look, I'm not going to persuade you otherwise. I'm not seeking to do so in a way, because the inspector will have to form his view on it. You've heard Mr. Butterworth's evidence on that point. Just dealing again with this point, it's right also, isn't it, that if one had the kickabout area in that green space down in the I'm doing the bottom right hand corner for fear of getting my northeast and west
I know what you mean.
Used. You know where I am.
Where it's shown in the neighbourhood plan.
Yeah, you know where I am. One would have a slightly different relationship between the development and the countryside beyond it. At the moment, it's a fairly linear line that one has along the south of the site, and it would provide a more broken up relationship, wouldn't it, between the proposed development and the countryside? That's another point that Mr. Butterworth made.
I think, if I understand you correctly, by putting it where it's shown in the neighbourhood plan, you would effectively have homes which would be more condensed. I consider more cramped, more condensed. In the northern part of the site, you would then have the area of kickabout, and then you'd have the countryside and the landscape beyond. But I don't see that necessarily as a much better design and layout solution.
Okay, well, fine. Let me just go through, just check what you said this morning and check if I wanted to just deal with any other points on that. This issue about suburban and suburban character and layout, I think we're agreed that this is not a totally rural location.
It's an edge of village location.
Exactly. We're not centre of town. We're not necessarily suburbia here. We're an edge of village location, and the design response should be appropriate to that.
That's right, and that's what I believe we've done.
Yeah, that you absolutely. You say that is your response is appropriate. Mr. Butterworth has again explained his concerns, but I think nothing between us that what we're looking for is an edge of village. A development which responds to its edge of village location. And the point I think that he makes on this is that there are elements of the rural development which he believes of a rural development which he believes would be better incorporated into this with fewer semi-detached dwellings. And his point is that the use of semi-detached dwellings, as have been used here, is more akin to a suburban layout. I think that's a point that you disagree with, but I just want to put that point to you and give you an opportunity.
it's difficult, isn't it? We can't just put one character type within, urban, suburban, and rural, because there's a whole lot of blends between those. It's not dissimilar in character and form to what exists around the rest of the village. And if we look at even just at the immediate vicinity on the landscape master plan, we see areas of detached houses in Twoggate Meadow. These are detached houses that are very close together with small gardens. We have areas along the green where we have small terraces of about 4 or 5 houses in small terraces. We go around the corner and we're on Waltham Road and we have pairs of semi-detached houses. So there's different character in this immediate vicinity. So I don't consider for a moment that the proposal, Bewley's proposal to put semi-detached homes on this site is an unacceptable or inappropriate design solution for this site.
Well, you hear I hear what you say. You've heard what Mr. Butterworth has to say on that.
Yes.
And the inspector will come to a view on it. Thank you very much. I think I can probably, just checking the other points you made this morning, but I think we've essentially covered those issues. Yeah, just help me. I think you said it's in but just so that I understand it, so the inspector has it. The relationship at the very southern end of the site is it's an agricultural fence that's being proposed along that southern boundary between the edge of the proposed development, where, as it were, and the existing open space. Yeah.
It's a wooden fence that you would be able to see through the fence. It's not, it's not a sort of garden fence where it's post boarded. You will see through.
I think in some of probably in an earlier iteration of the design and access statement or something, there was more of a garden fencey type thing shown. But I just I heard your evidence earlier on it, and I just wanted to make sure that I'd understood that evidence.
Yeah, I believe that's right. It's not a solid boundary. No.
Fine. That's helpful to understand. Thank you. And in terms of topography and responding, sorry, that's the other point I should have dealt with. Topography and responding to topography. The fact of the topography of the site doesn't need to be between us. The inspector will see that on site. And what we know, I think, is that there is a fall across the site. Exactly how much that fall is, I think Mr. Warren put it at about 7 meters. That seems to be the case from the OS.
I think that's the full extent of the site, rather than just this area of built form. I think across the space about 5, but I don't think we need to disagree on that.
No, fine. No, exactly. The inspector's got the OS mapped. He's got what the plan and the design and access statement, and probably the most important thing will to be on site with those plans and to
it's a gentle slope. It's not a sloped site. It's a gentle slope from one side to the other.
Yeah, and what we have, I think, is a situation where we've got green space located in the lower part of the site, and you explained that Mr. Warren, I think, explained that some of the suds were well located in the lower part of the site for drainage reasons.
Yeah.
And that some of that, and certainly the kickabout area, contributes to this, pushes or extends. I don't want to use pejorative language necessarily, but factually it extends the housing, the area of built development, onto the higher parts of the site, slightly higher parts of the site. And one would have a different relationship. One might have more of the development on the lower parts of the site. Again, if the kickabout area weren't where it's been proposed.
I mean, I think, I'm sure we're all in agreement that the location of suds is dictated by levels.
Yeah.
And no one's going to suggest that it would be necessary to pump. There are biodiversity and drainage reasons. So they are to a degree fixed in the southern part of the site. Yes, I guess we could have moved the kickabout area, but it wouldn't have made a significant difference in terms of the amount of development that's on slightly higher ground. And in fact, I think it's in the statement of common ground where we show the built area of the of the appeal scheme and the indicative built area from the neighbourhood plan. Now, we do extend slightly further south, but actually not by much, and we're still well within the dotted blue line of the allocation in the neighbourhood plan.
Yeah,
we've extended, and of course, there's nothing in the neighbourhood plan to suggest that had we put homes right down to the southern boundary, denoted by the blue dotted line, that would have been unacceptable.
No. That would be a matter for planning judgment on the specifics of that scheme, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
Because I think the way, I don't seek to take a point against it, but I think the way in which the neighbourhood development plan works, there's the indicative red line. I think it's a red line, and then the text says that the built development could be extended towards that dotted blue line, doesn't it, if necessary, or
and of course that's entirely what we have done. And let's say if you were to look at the plan in the statement of common ground, so it's an agreed plan.
Yeah.
It just helpfully shows that whereas the indicative area in the neighbourhood plan shown in yellow, we have obviously pulled it further, which is the area shown in purple. We've pulled it slightly further south, but not significantly so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think I've got it up in front of me. I don't think we need to turn to it necessarily, but it shows exactly that.
Yeah,
you're right. Thank you. I think that is all I wanted to discuss with you about reason for refusal 2. If we could move then to the planning balance.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just get to my note, sorry. Just so that I understand really the exercise that you are undertaking and the one that you're reporting to the inspector, you, for reasons of planning judgment, disagree with us on highways and disagree with us on reason for refusal 2 on the layout of the scheme. So you are in a position where you don't, in your judgment, there's no conflict with the development plan policies, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm entirely reliant on Mr. Burbridge on highways, but between us, yes, I'm of the view there is absolutely no conflict at all between the appeal scheme and the development plan.
And so when you're reporting what should be done, I appreciate that in your evidence in chief, you referred both to sort of a flat balance, as it were, and a tilted balance. But you're reporting it from the position of there not being a highways safety issue and a conclusion that the design is of a high quality.
Correct, yes.
And so what you have is a situation which is pretty straightforward, no development plan conflict. And so you find yourself in the position of advising on that basis that the scheme should be approved.
Yeah, to me, I think it's clear and straightforward.
So what you're not doing, and it's no criticism that you're not doing this, it's just you reach different views to us on it, but you're not reporting a situation where there is a highway safety issue, there is less than high quality design on the scheme. Yep. You're not dealing with that situation.
That's it. We disagree on those points.
Yeah. And obviously the inspector has Mr. Butterworth's views on it if he finds himself in that situation, and he'll have to reach his own view on the planning balance if he finds himself in that situation.
Yeah.
Grateful. There's no issue between us. You very helpfully clarified, and no issue on 5-year housing land supply, so I don't need to trouble you on that. The inspector's got the points in Mr. Butterworth's proof of evidence and orally yesterday about that, and I think we're agreed. In terms of weighting. I think we're agreed in terms of weighting on delivery of housing. I think Mr. Butterworth described that yesterday as a significant benefit.
Yes.
Having considered the level of the shortfall, and I don't think you take any issue on that basis.
We've not assessed the shortfall. We take it as read from our knowledge of the area and from what we've read that there is a shortfall.
And similarly, Mr. Butterworth, I think, agreed with Mr. Warren that on affordable housing, again, that is a significant benefit. So the provision of housing, nothing between us, housing and affordable housing, significant benefit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to deal with it the way you deal with it in your proof. There are your first 6 benefits, and I mean we can turn them up if it's helpful. And it seemed to me, and by all means correct me if I'm wrong, but those first 6 matters, appreciate that one can cut things in different ways, but they're really dealing with that point about the delivery of housing and the delivery of affordable housing, and giving that significant weight. Yeah.
Yes, I agree that the housing and the affordable housing should be given significant, or indeed very significant weight, particularly as there's no 5-year supply. But I don't think we should overlook the other points. I do accept that they are related to the delivery of homes, but the efficient use of land, the need to deliver housing that's within a development plan, a neighbourhood plan, meeting local and neighbourhood plan needs, and sustainable location. I think they're all important, and I do believe that they do warrant substantial benefit.
Well, if for example the housing was in an unsustainable location without accessibility to public transport, not the situation we find ourselves in, but if that was the case, certainly from a sort of access perspective, albeit the safety issue, that would be a reason, wouldn't it, to reduce the weight to the delivery of housing. You would probably give less weight to housing which was poorly accessible by public transport, for example.
Well, I actually think they are different points. You could do it that way, but I would see that they're 2 different points. The delivery of homes would still carry substantial weight in that case, but you wouldn't benefit from the additional weight afforded from having an accessible and sustainable location.
And equally, if the housing mix wasn't in accordance with the needs of the borough, again, that would be a reason I would suggest why one might slightly temper the weight to be given, the significant weight, one might temper that, rather than saying that's a separate benefit which should be given substantial weight in its own right.
Again, I can see why you might do that, but I stand by my view that there is the added benefit associated with having the appropriate mix.
Okay, fine. Well, look, we're apart, but it may be a nuance rather than a fundamental disagreement. Right. Is that fair?
I think that's right.
Fine. So that I think deals with those first 6 benefits. The next 3, as you put them, if I term these economic benefits, is that fair description?
Yes, they're all linked, well, social and economic, but yes. Yeah.
And those sorts of benefits, contribution of 1.4 million of SIL, jobs through the construction process, and contribution to the economy, they are the sorts of benefits that one would anticipate really with any form of residential development. Unless, I suppose in SIL you might say, well, if it's 100% affordable housing, you get a relief from the SIL. But apart from that, if you're providing standard ordinary needs housing, you're going to be asked to contribute towards SIL, aren't you?
You will. There's a high SIL requirement, and it's a significant amount of money going into the borough and the local social housing pot. The local social infrastructure pot. So I do still see that as a substantial benefit.
Okay. Well,
perhaps not as significant, let's say, as the housing and affordable housing, but I still do think that it's important.
Would moderate, the weight Mr. Butterworth gives is moderate to that? Would that be a fairer description?
I don't want to change my view on it. I will stick by my view that it does carry substantial weight, but I do accept that it perhaps not as substantial as the housing and affordable housing.
just want to look with how you've dealt with another economic benefit, contribution of new homes bonus and council tax revenue. You give that some weight.
Yeah.
That's also a sort of, if I put it this way, that's another economic benefit, perhaps a social benefit that derives from the delivery of housing.
It is. I think it's just something that is just more directly linked to number of homes and a contribution to the local community. It's directly paying for that local service, whereas the SIL, I think is an added benefit, which is why I weight them differently.
Well, SIL is providing for making sure that the infrastructure, essentially providing money that can be put towards infrastructure, isn't it?
It is.
And it's worked out on a rough and ready basis, albeit very complicated in Schedule 1 of SIL, but it's worked out on a basis of floor space and locally set tariffs in terms of how much it's anticipated that development needs to contribute for the purposes of SIL.
I think that's right, but I think Overton will benefit specifically from the SIL. So they have a neighbourhood plan. That proportion of that money will directly benefit the village, as well as it benefiting the borough as a whole. Okay.
Well, the point I'm going to put to you, I think you've seen it coming, is simply that the way you've dealt with the new homes bonus of affording some, or in what Mr. Butterworth's words, I think moderate weight is a more reasonable way to deal with it than you have the other economic benefits.
I hear what you say. I'd like to stick by my view that the others carry substantial benefit, although I'll reiterate my point that the housing and the affordable housing will carry the most weight in this case.
Dealing then, if I may, with provision of public open space. Again, that's another feature which you attribute substantial weight to.
Yes.
The delivery of public open space, appreciate you are slightly above the minimum standards, but again, that is something which is a policy requirement, isn't it, to deliver public open space?
It is a policy requirement, and I don't have the figures ahead of me, but we are quite well over the provision of open space. You can see that from the landscape master plan, the amount of open space that's proposed relative to the number of homes in the site area. So I think it does still carry substantial weight.
Okay. Again, I'll just simply put this point to you that moderate weight would be a fairer description, given that it's something really that the development needs to provide in order to make it acceptable in planning terms.
Yeah, I accept we have a different opinion on that.
Okay. Biodiversity net gain, then, please, something you attribute substantial weight to. You make the point that there's no planning policy guidance or legislation which requires more than no net loss of biodiversity.
Yes.
There's talk of an environment bill which may or may not bring in a figure. We'll wait and see.
I'm sure it will in due course. But at the current time, we are we're way over the minimum requirement.
Well, you say way over. The minimum requirement is no net loss. You're at 6.74%. So that's not way over, is it? That's a marginal increase on what you needed to do.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not an ecologist, but in my view, to go even that much over, I think it does carry substantial weight. Okay.
Well, Mr. Butterworth's evidence is minimal weight, and the inspector will form his own view on that. I think we're probably not going to agree, and we've put our cases to the inspector for him to take a view. All right. And then just finally, then number 13, it's a similar point: off-site equipped play area and allotments. Again, policy requirements, aren't they, to make the development acceptable in planning terms? They're part of your national undertaking, which we're going to look at a bit later on. But substantial, again, that's slightly over-egging it, isn't it? And as Mr. Butterworth says, moderate would be a fairer description of those things. They're necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms.
I think that's right. I don't think there's any reason for us to disagree on that. I'm not necessarily changing my view, but this is this is one which, yes, it's necessary to make the development acceptable. There will be benefits, not just for the development, for the wider village, but certainly it doesn't carry the same level of weight, perhaps, as some of the others.
Okay, fine. Ms. Charles, those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Defer. Thank you, Mrs. Charles. I don't have any questions myself. Mr. Warren, do you have anything for the re-examination?
Just a few references, really, so just to fill in as that discussion went on to help you, I hope. So, Ms. Charles, could we just go back to the question of starting with that section on benefits at the end of your cross-examination?
Yes.
I just wanted to put, first of all, the economic benefits. You were asked about that group of 3, do you remember? And the inspectors, the exchange will be fresh in the inspector's memory. The MPPF, I don't know whether you've got a copy to hand, as we always say.
Give me 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, if you have, so, Mr. Defer, well, I'm heading to section 6 of the framework, where the economic points are dealt with.
Sorry, section 6.
Section 6 is page 23 of 75 in the PDF.
Got it here.
Under the heading Building a Strong Competitive Economy. Are you with me there?
Yes.
And it talks about, in paragraph 81, if you've got people have it in front of them, talks about decisions helping to create the conditions in which business can invest, adapt and expand. Significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity. Yeah.
Yes.
Taking into account both local businesses and wider opportunities for development. Now, in terms of the ones that you refer to, can you just please help the inspector with the extent to which those points relate or don't relate, fall within or don't fall within the subject of this paragraph in the framework and what it says about weight?
Well, I think the paragraph 81 of the framework sort of supports my view that there is significant weight that should be placed on the economic benefits of development. Jobs, perhaps, particularly.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. The second question, again, staying with that section of questions that you had on benefits. You were asked the question about yes, I don't need to ask you that actually. Yes, they're going back then to the questions you were asked about your evidence in chief, effectively, in some of those matters that are in dispute. Let me just see if I can see you again. Yeah, the disputes between you and Mr. Butterworth. Do you remember the questions that you were asked about topography? You were asked about the context, the slope. You described it as a gentle slope. Do you remember?
Yes, that's right.
Again, by reference to any plan, just as an aid memoir of the scheme, I just wanted to come back to this question of visual effect and housing in this alternative formulation, if you like, that Mr. Butterworth's keener on. If housing were down towards the bottom, the lower area in the northwest of the site, and open space was more in the southeast.
Yes.
Bearing in mind the agreement that we've got on where you would see the scheme from, Tewgate Lane and some glimpses through from the other side, what would be the effect in terms of overall massing and so on of development if the housing were down there rather than disposed further away from the viewer?
I think if we had the housing in the area of the suds and the green space, actually the visual impact from Tewgate Lane would be more significant.
Yeah.
You would see more built form through the gaps in the trees and the hedgerow along that edge.
And you referred, I do just want to touch, because we haven't looked at it, and it's something that's relevant to the questions that you were asked about topography and layout and so on that statement of common ground sketch, the overlay sketch. Could we just have a quick look at that in the main statement of common ground? It's Appendix 1, sir, to the main statement of common ground.
Yeah.
Let's wait till others have it, Miss Charles, and then you were referring to purple and so on. I was scrabbling for scrabbling for the document to remind myself what was blue and what was purple. So this is
page 34 of the PDF, just to assist.
That's very kind, thank you. I've got it in hard copy. Do you have that? So it's 1605-54. It says sketch on it. It's appendix A. Appendix 1 to the statement.
And just to be clear, it says sketch because because many of the lines overlap. So the lines, for example, behind more cottages, etc., they actually obviously sit on top of each other. But so that it's distinguishable, the architect has put them alongside one another. So that's why it's sketch.
No, I understand that, and there's nothing between us on the detail and factual accuracy, etc. It was more just to explore very briefly. You were asked about housing on higher parts of the site, and you responded in part by referring to the relationship between the scheme and the neighbourhood plan indicative drawing. And you said, I think you used the expression, we've pulled it further south, but not significantly further south, you said.
That's correct.
And you referred to this drawing. Now, there are just one point of context really for this. Do you see the line which is in, I don't know how to describe it, kind of orangey brown colour, which I think is, what's that orangey brown line that goes slightly to the north of the purple line?
That's the neighbourhood plan red line boundary.
Red line boundary, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think we even need to get the other plan out, but is that factually or isn't it related to, is it drawn along the contour,
no.
along a contour line, or does it go run up the slope and down the slope, if you like?
I haven't overlaid this against a topographical survey, but this line simply follows what Taylor Wimpey had put together to support the allocation in the first place.
Yes.
So this was the area that was deemed sufficient to deliver 70 homes. But within that area, as we saw yesterday in your cross-examination with Mr. Butterworth, that area for 70 homes didn't include any SUDs and didn't include any buffers. So in order to allow for SUDs and to allow for buffers, even to deliver 70 homes would have required the built form to extend slightly further south.
Yeah, and then just in terms of disposing built form along this, on the gradient, if you like, on the slope, even if you just stuck with the 70, the red line, indicative line in the neighbourhood plan, what would that have meant in terms of whether there would have been housing on the higher part of the slope? Would there have been housing on the higher part?
So I'm not sure I fully understand. I think what you're saying is if there were just 70 homes, would housing have had to be extended onto higher ground? I think possibly some would have done in order to accommodate the buffers and SUDs, even if the kickabout area was broadly in the area shown indicatively in the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you. That you've sorry about the vague question. It's always one of the toils of trying not to lead in re-examination. Dennis, thank you very much, Mr. Charles. You've covered the point I wanted. Very briefly, in addition to that, you were asked a question. This was in the first section on. It was really about the kickabout. Series of questions you were asked about the kickabout area, and you were asked first of all about if it weren't where it's proposed, you could have had back-to-back houses, etc. And then there was some questions about antisocial behaviour, which I'll come back to in a second. But it was also then put to you that if the kickabout area had been proposed or were proposed in the southeastern corner of the site, then it might benefit from more open views. Do you remember you said, well, you could design it there? Now, just in terms of views, if the kickabout area were in that corner, the top, as it were, southeastern corner, and you were there, you were kicking about on that area, what would you actually be able to see in terms of what might be described as, quote, open views of the countryside from there?
You would see the open countryside beyond, but the land is still rising ahead of you if you're looking south and eastwards.
Yes.
So you would not be on higher ground looking down onto the open countryside.
Yeah, and in terms of open countryside, obviously I don't include in that, so let me make it absolutely clear, for the purposes of my question, the buffer, the meadow planting and the trees and so on.
Mhm.
There is the boundary that we can see. Have you got the landscape plan still available to you with
Yes.
the overlay? Can we just have a look at that again? CD 26, of course, so that one. You've probably
Yeah.
still got it open. So if you're imagining, instead of the units in the southeastern corner of the scheme, a kickabout area located roughly there, in terms of whether there would be open views, for instance, to the east, would there be open views to the east or not?
Well, there wouldn't be, because of the existing tree belt that exists along the east and southern edges of the wider blue dotted line neighbourhood plan site.
Yeah, well, obviously the inspector, thank you.
So it would obscure those views. Yeah.
Inspector will see that when he's on site. Okay, nearly there. I just want to come back to this point about antisocial behaviour, and you had an exchange about whether you thought that would be a factor or not. I just wanted to come back, please, to what was said about this by relevant experts on the application. So do you have the committee report there? That's called document 5.
Bear with me.
5.
So bear with me, I just need to refresh the...
Yes, of course. No, you need to refresh the whole page, don't you, rather than just the document I've discovered. When it's refreshed and you've opened it, would you mind going to PDF page 8 of 55?
Yeah, I've got that here.
Thanks. So this is, in the normal way, where the case officer is summarising the views of consultees.
Yes.
And we see additional comments from various people at the top of that page, and then we get to policy. Do you see that? Policy, no objection. Then we've got urban design officer, whose views you referred to in your evidence. Landscape, trees, and then we come to parks and open spaces officer. Yeah.
Yes.
And the final comments are briefly set out there, aren't they? No objection, subject to conditions.
That's right.
So in terms of the functionality and whether there would be pros and cons or concerns, etc., about those open spaces, the relevant officer thought what?
Ultimately, she was happy with what was proposed. There was some discussion during the application process, just making sure that there was a correct understanding of the purposes of the different types of open space and making sure that we were compliant with policy. There were some tweaks and alterations made and some additional information provided, but ultimately she confirmed at the end that she had no objection, that she was happy with what was proposed. And that included the kickabout area as well as all other types of open space.
Yeah, absolutely. And then specifically about whether there would be a material risk or harm in terms of crime and antisocial behaviour. If you scroll down, please, to page 9 of 55, just above the public observations, we've got the record of the views of the designing out crime officer.
Yes.
You see that? What did that person say about the scheme, including obviously the kickabout area, which was part of it?
So having looked at what was proposed, they confirmed that the planting in the open spaces shouldn't obscure natural surveillance. It's a point necessary to minimise crime. Increasing lighting to provide safety and security for residents. Now, the kickabout area doesn't have lighting. It's not intended to be used after dark. And that properties with rear communal access, footpaths backing onto the open space, to have robust gates fitted to prevent people trying to access gardens from that area.
So in terms of concerns about antisocial behaviour on the kickabout area,
there were no concerns. No concerns about that.
Thank you very much. And then the final question goes right back to the beginning. Do you remember you were asked by Mr. Dufour about the development plan EM10 and matters of judgment and so on? And you were asked about whether the members and indeed the inspector were free, do you remember, free to disagree with your views and the views of the case officer and so on. Because obviously this is an appeal which has the merits of the appeal, but also has as we know, a costs aspect to it.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that in the consideration by the inspector of that evidence, and indeed the evidence of Mr. Butterworth, we have the full context also in mind. You know, and I'm sure my learned friend won't mind me leading on the fact that it is an aspect of the cost regime, isn't it, in the MPPG, the PPG, that local planning authorities must not behave unreasonably,
Yes.
and must provide evidence to substantiate their reasons for refusal.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure I won't be criticised. I hope I won't be criticised for leading on that. Those two obvious principles that we have in the PPG. Now, you're right at the end of all of this. You've heard the evidence of Mr. Butterworth on your specific points. What is your view, having heard all of that evidence, as to whether the council has produced evidence that meets that test or not?
I don't believe they have any evidence, particularly if I refer specifically to reason for refusal 2, going right back to the start as to what that reason for refusal says. It says that the development is cramped relative to the site area, and that is it. That's all that says. And it says the reason for that refusal is based on policy EM10 and the guidance within the SPD.
Yeah,
that is the only evidence that exists to substantiate the point. But the point is cramped development.
And in terms, finally, of Mr. Butterworth's evidence, which we heard yesterday, and I know that you were listening and watching that evidence, that's the evidence, obviously, that the council relies on in relation to this reason for refusal. You heard the questions and so on and the answers that he gave. You've accepted in your evidence cross-examination that there are matters of judgment in play here. What does that mean, in your view, about whether the council has or hasn't provided substantiated their reasons for refusal by reference to evidence or not, even bearing in mind that it's subjective to some degree?
Mr. Butterworth has presented a case. I think a lot of that case is not directly relevant to the reason for refusal, and therefore doesn't really provide the evidence to substantiate reason for refusal 2.
All right, thank you. Obviously, the inspector will consider that. Sir, that's all by way of examination, Ms. Charles. Thank you very much. Can I just raise one point, sir? Let me just make sure that I can see everybody properly. You asked the question of Mr. Butterworth about that southern portion of the field, and you said you might ask Ms. Charles. And when we were talking about it last night, we agreed that we wouldn't preempt anything that you wanted to raise with Ms. Charles by kind of trying to deal with it in evidence in chief. Are you happy with that, sir, or would you?
Well, I didn't ask Miss Charles that question. I thought the one I'd put to Mr. Butterworth that I was going to put to Miss Charles was actually to do with where I should go to see long distance views, if there were any. However, you covered that point actually in evidence in chief anyway, so I didn't feel the need to ask that. However, just for completeness, I'm more than, if you have a view, or Miss Charles has a view on the what we call it, surplus land to the south, or the remaining part of the field that doesn't form part of the appeal site, then I would be interested to hear an answer.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful. Ms. Charles, would you just cover that point for us?
Of course. I mean, it's land beyond the appeal site, the allocation site. Sorry, beyond the appeal site. It's land that would be retained in agricultural use, and should there be any proposed development on it in the future, that would be subject to a local and neighbourhood plan process and ultimately a planning application. But the land would be retained in agricultural use is the answer.
Thank you.
As envisaged actually in the neighbourhood plan, because remember the neighbourhood plan perhaps only envisaged part of that site coming forward.
Yes, it did.
I'm grateful. So thank you very much for the opportunity just to cover that point as well. That's all from Ms. Charles, I think. Thank you very much, Ms. Charles.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. Thank you, Mr. Warren. I think we're probably due a short break. So if I may, we're running ahead of time, which is good. I have no objections to that. So let me say we'll adjourn until 11:30, just to give ourselves a bit of time. And after that, we'll come back, and I think the first thing we'll do is to look at the legal undertaking, and then follow that with conditions, depending on how timing goes. Okay, adjourned until 11:30.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning. Again, it's 11:30 and the inquiry's resumed. Okay, so I'd like, if I may, to turn to the issue of the legal agreement, or legal undertaking. It's a unilateral, I see, and a short discussion on that. I've got a few points. I think before doing so, I ought to reiterate what I said at the very start of the inquiry, that a discussion on the legal agreement, unilateral undertaking, or conditions doesn't mean that I've made my mind up on any part of the inquiry, nor does it prejudice the positions of either of the main parties. It's a necessary part of the inquiry procedure, so that I have all matters before me before I reach my decision. As far as documents are concerned, I've obviously got the undertaking open. I've got the supplementary statement of common ground. I've got Mr. Butterworth's proof because, as he drew to my attention, the SIL compliance statement is appended to that rather than as a separate document. And I've also got Natural England's latest response on the nutrient mitigation matters, which is at CD 57, if you haven't got that one open. I'd asked some questions this morning just in anticipation of this discussion, and Mr. Defoe, you kindly have responded to those by saying that you're happy, title has been checked and you're happy, but you had spotted, I think, 5 typos that you would like to comment on further. Would you care to do that now?
So I might ask Emma Bethel if she's online. They are, I confess, her points, and she's the one that's been negotiating the section 106. She's the solicitor instructing me. So I can see that she's there, and I think her microphone has been turned on. So if I may, so I'll hand over to Ms. Bethel to deal with these 5 points. As I said at the outset, they've been flagged to the appellant solicitors yesterday, so hopefully it doesn't come as a surprise. There's been an exchange of correspondence on them, and we really raised them to try and be helpful, to spot issues early rather than anything else. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Ms. Bethel to deal with those, if I may.
Very well.
Just before she comes back on the screen, I think she's having a domestic moment, like we all do. I have with me, or will have very shortly, I think there's just a tiny connection issue on our part, my instructing solicitor, or the solicitor who's instructed on behalf of Bewley's, Mr. Johnson of Pennington's. So he may take a moment or two to join us, but he will come back on, or come back on those points when Miss Bethel has an opportunity to make them.
So, okay.
So it would probably be sensible in that case, wouldn't it, for us to wait just a moment until that gentleman joins us? Okay.
Does the council admin? I think that has to be omitted, doesn't he? Is that?
Actually, I see that Democratic Services unusually isn't online with us. So
no, I'm told. Forgive me for interrupting. I'm told that he's joined via the link, but he can't. But he hasn't been admitted yet. So he's just waiting. He's
Page, what you hand up. Are you telling us?
Here he is. Here he is.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I was going to say, sorry. Yeah, one of my colleagues, Meredith, is doing the hosting, so she is letting him in. Apologies.
That's all right.
Yeah, he's with us now.
Okay. Well, good morning, Mr. Johnson. If you care to put your camera on, thank you. And Miss Bethel, are you available yet? Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir. I have got my camera on. I'm just not sure if you can see me because I can't see myself, but perhaps you can hear me if you can't see me.
I can both see and hear you. So we're okay, so long as you're happy to continue. Okay.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Defoe, were you going to ask the question to Mr. Bethel, or she's going to put them?
Well, I think I'll just let her talk you through these 5 points as I think it now stands. And I'll just ask her to take them through in order, if I may.
Okay, Ms. Bethel, over to you. I believe there's some issues with the most recent version, the engrossed version of the unilateral that you had noticed. Could you just list those for me and explain what problems may or may not be.
Yes, certainly, sir. I think, as Mr. Defer said, they're more typographical errors, but we just wanted to bring them to your attention so you can take your view on them. So first one, if I could take you, sir, to page 11 of the PDF of the unilateral undertaking.
Is that internal page 11?
Sorry, yes, apologies. It's page 13 of the PDF. Apologies, that's it's internal page 11, but it's page 13 of the PDF.
Okay. Okay, yes, I'm there.
At the bottom of that page, sir, you'll see the definition for nitrate mitigation land plan. It is the final definition on that page.
I've got you.
And you will see, sir, it obviously refers to a plan, and then it notes that that is attached to the deed at Appendix 5.
Okay.
However, sir, if you actually turn to Appendix 5, which I believe starts at page 141, that is actually a different document, a document entitled the Report to Inform the Appropriate Assessment, and the plan referred to in this definition is actually appended at Appendix 2 at page 43. So just the council was flagging that reference, instead of being to Appendix 5, should actually be to Appendix 2, just for the sake of clarity. We don't take issue that the drawing number, we appreciate that is correct, but just as a point of clarity, the reference to the appendix should be to Appendix 2.
Should be Appendix 2. All right, I've got that one. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Then, sir, if we could go to page 10 of the PDF, which is, I think, internal page 8.
Yeah.
Second definition on this page is of existing trees and hedgerows.
Yes.
And you will see, sir, it refers to an area shown hatched green on the plan. The plan is actually defined on page 14 of this PDF document. And that definition is to the plan attached at Appendix 1. The plan itself appears at page 41 of the PDF. And if you can see that, sir, you'll see that that is obviously the red line plan for the purposes of the application and this matter, but it doesn't show any area hatched in green.
Okay. What is the solution to that, Mrs. Betchell? What do they need to do?
So the solution to this is, so if I could take you to page 21 of the PDF. It's internal page 19, if you've got the hard copy. Sorry.
Yeah, it's probably easy to go by internal numbers. I am using the PDF version, but let's just stick with internal numbers. Yeah, okay. Page 19.
Yes, page 19. So in clause 16.3.1.3, which is near the bottom of the page, you'll see that it refers to the location of the existing trees or hedgerows as a matter that's to be identified on the multifunctional green space plan.
Okay, yes, I do.
The council would therefore suggest that in the definition of existing trees and hedgerows, instead of reference to the plan, it is just reference to the multifunctional green space plan, just for clarity again, because obviously there is no green hatching on the plan that's attached.
That sounds logical. All right, yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Next point, if you will.
Yes, certainly, sir. So if I could now take you to page 8, internal page 8 of the document, page 10 for anyone using the PDF.
Yes.
There is a definition about halfway down this page of habitat management and monitoring plan.
That's it.
And this definition refers to this document being appended at Appendix 3. Similar to my first point, unfortunately, this document is actually appended at Appendix 4.
Oh, okay.
So it's just a correction there from Appendix 3 to Appendix 4. Appendix 3 is actually the ecological impact assessment, which is defined elsewhere in the document.
Thank you.
Next point, so if I may, it's page 25 of the internal page numbers, 27 of the PDF. And if I could take you to clause 20.1, sir.
20.1, yes, I'm with you.
It's just the fourth line down, so it's just there's a reference there to the service lead, housing and social inclusion. The defined term is actually the head of housing and social inclusion, and that has filtered through the rest of the affordable housing clause. Unfortunately, this one just has not been amended, so it would just be to replace service lead with head of, just to make it consistent with the defined terms earlier in the agreement.
Okay, thank you very much. And the fifth point, please.
Thank you, sir. And finally, if I may, if I could take you, I'm just going to check the internal page reference. It is page 28, apologies, of the internal page numbers, page 30 of the PDF.
I'm with you. Mm-hmm.
It's clause 20.13, so under the heading affordable housing exemption clauses.
I see it.
In clause 20.13.1, sir, you'll see on the last line there's reference to clause 20.15 below.
I do, yes.
Unfortunately, there isn't a 20.15 in this agreement. The last clause is 20.14, so it should just be reference to 20.14. Again, just for clarity, as there isn't a 20.15. And similarly, in the next subclause, there's reference on the penultimate line to clause 18, and it should be clause 20, because that is the affordable housing clause, and that is what should be referenced. So again, just minor corrections and cross-referencing to make sure that the obligations are clear and understood.
Okay. I'm always impressed by people who go to such a level of detail.
Those are all
documents
the
that, frankly, are sometimes less than exciting to read. So congratulations to you, Mr. Betchell. I think we probably need just to turn to you, Mr. Warren, and perhaps Mr. Johnson. Those are all quite, they're just typos, but they've been picked up. I think they can probably, the best thing to do is to correct them in the way that Ms. Betchell has suggested as solutions. What's your view on that?
Well, I'll hand over to Mr. Johnson just to respond on the points themselves very briefly, and then we'll come back to consider the way forward after that. If I can hand over to Mr. Johnson. Thanks.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Apologies for earlier. Yeah, look, we can correct them. They're not material as far as the unilateral is concerned, or the obligations. I don't think anything really turns on them at all, because it's actually quite clear within there. There's an index within the unilateral as well, which refers to the correct appendices. As with these things, the rush to get them sorted, the rush to get the document completed, overtook having a complete review of that. But we can do that. The only my query is we can't change the document you've got, because that's the signed and dated document. We can do an addendum stating this is what it should be, or we can do a deed of variation, which will take some time, and quite happy to do that. There's no problem with that at all. The owners are offshore, so it does take a little bit of time, which is why there was a delay between the grocers being agreed with the councils and getting them. But more than happy to do that, or we can just do it as a addendum to it, saying and they are, as you said, sir, just typos on there that don't affect the basis of the undertakings that have been given.
I think, well, I agree with you with that. What's your preference? Which would be the easiest and quickest?
Well, the quickest would just be an addendum to go on there, just to state that that there are mistakes in there, and I can get that signed.
Fine.
And added to it if the LPA are happy with that, of course.
Well, let's ask the LPA now. Probably Mrs. Betchell is the person to ask. With us, Mrs. Betchell, you heard what Mr. Johnson said there. Would you
Yes,
be happy
sir. We would.
with an addendum?
Yes, we would be happy with that. We would be happy with that. Thank you, sir. Just
Right.
for a point of clarity, but yes, we'd be happy with that.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in that case, may I suggest we go down that route? Give me a timescale, Mr. Johnson. When would that be able to be done and submitted to the council, and then a copy to the PINS?
Well, I can draft that today. That'll be done today, and I will get it sent by PDF to the parties. Clearly, the owners and Bewley would need to sign it. So that's, judging by how long it took last time, I'd say 7 days on that, just to get it back from them. The difficulty is the owners are not in one place. They were in Switzerland, then they went to Slovenia, and trying to find a courier to get documents back. Whilst they can sign a PDF, print it out and sign it, it then has to be couriered back. So this is causing some difficulty. So I think 7 days it should be sufficient. I'll get that circulated today.
Right, I'll work on that basis then. If you could do that today, that would be most grateful.
Absolutely.
And I'll then give, even after the close of the inquiry, that's not a problem, up to 7 days for the addendum to be signed, and that I hope then will address those points.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as far as the heads of terms within the agreement are concerned, hang on, let me get them up. I've obviously had a look at those. I'll be judging those against section 122 of the SIL regulations, as you would expect. I have a SIL compliance statement on behalf of the council, which, as I said a little earlier, is appended to the proof of Mr. Butterworth. So that gives me all the information that I feel necessary for most of those heads of terms. The one aspect that I would like to have a little help on was that relating to the nitrates mitigation, which obviously was originally a reason for refusal. At the CMC, it was still an issue that had yet to be resolved, although discussions were taking place, and then has been able to be resolved quite recently, in particular with the most latest response from Natural England, who have removed their objection to a particular element of it, which I understand is to do with how the mitigation land would be managed in the long term. And it's that element, I think, that I would like to understand what discussions took place and what agreement has been reached. How is that mitigation going to be managed in the long term? Who would be best to speak to that? Perhaps Mrs. Charles? I'm not quite sure. Mr. Warren, I'm probably looking at you as the lead for the appellants.
Well, sir, I can ask Miss Charles if you give us a moment. Mr. Wood obviously was the team member who was most directly involved in the discussions with Natural England. So if it's a fundamentally a practical question about how that will be managed, then I'll just have to have a quick discussion with Miss Charles, I think, about who deals with that. I don't know whether Mr. Johnson can help on that in terms of what the 106 actually provides. But if it's a question of, literally what would happen and who would do it, then I think I'll need to turn to Mr. Charles.
I mean, I understand. Obviously, it has been agreed between the main parties. You're quite happy with that. We have the response from Natural England. The reason I ask is that nutrient mitigation amongst, obviously, I'm very familiar with other SPA issues that have arisen around the country, particularly in the southeast, but the ones arising from nutrient mitigation around the Solent are relatively recent, and I just want to be satisfied that I understand exactly how it will be done, because it's different to how other SPAs are mitigated. I think it's fair saying that, and I think for my own education, if nothing else, I just want to be sure that I'm comfortable that it's necessary, which I'm happy with, that it can be mitigated, which obviously I recognise the advice coming from Natural England is that it can, but I just want to understand what the issue with the long-term management that they had concerns about, but which has now been overcome. How has that been overcome? What exactly has been put in place?
I think I can start on that. So, and if you need more, then we can seek advice from somebody else. But what I'd do, I think, is I'd refer you. You don't need to open it now, I don't think, but I'd refer you to Mr. Wood's proof, the one that we've left in front of the inquiry. In particular, pages 17 to 18, and the way that the nutrient mitigation strategy works is by substituting one type of planting or land use in agricultural use for another. So taking it out of agricultural use where nitrates are being put in the ground for fertilizer purposes, and that's, through the natural processes filters its way into watercourses and can have effect on the SPA, and substituting that for something which holds the nitrates rather than that are existing, rather than adds them artificially for farming purposes. And so that's why the relevant area for mitigation contains woodland planting and meadow rather than agricultural land. So in particular, say if you look at 4.6 in due course of the proof by Mr. Wood, you'll see that there is a meadow, and the habitat creation enhancement measures relate to that provision, as well as some woodland. And the issue really, as I understand it from having seen the earlier discussions between Natural England and Mr. Wood in particular on behalf of the appellant, was the extent to which they were happy with the ongoing maintenance of the meadow rather than woodland. And it was really a question of surveillance, because if there's wood there, they can go to all sorts of things, including Google Earth or a site visit, and see that there's woodland there. It's readily perceptible, whereas it's a bit less readily perceptible to see whether the meadow is being managed as it was. And that was just discussed over time between the parties. And Natural England's response of August, the one to which you refer, identified that they were content with the way that would be ensured. So there would be a process put in place with the local planning authority, first of all, through the 106, to ensure that the meadow was managed just in the normal way that you'd manage anything, frankly, through a 106 agreement. So one could go along as the local authority having a plan which says X and Y would be maintained there, and see by simply visiting the site whether that was taking place. So for instance, if one went and the meadow had been ploughed up again, it would be readily appreciable that wasn't being maintained. There's nothing further. It's really as simple as that, as I understand it. I'll be correct if I'm wrong, but that's what it came down to, the perceptibility on the part of the authorities, if you like, of the maintenance of the land. And having had the discussion and seen the form of words and so on, Natural England expressed their contentment with the final outcome.
Okay, all right. Right, so it was the meadow element rather than the woodland.
It was.
I understand. I suppose the concern is it would just go back to improved grassland, I suppose. Okay, yeah. And then the onus then is for it's more on monitoring. I suppose there is some management, because I imagine you have to crop a meadow, but
yes,
it's mainly monitoring, and that onus is left with the planning authority. Is that right? Or with a management company who would be formed to open space?
The obligation, obviously, to do it, to manage it, remains with the those who are responsible for managing the land through the agreement, so the management company, effectively. But it was never really about that. It was more about enforceability, this discussion. And as you're right to say that is something which principally relates to the council. The council themselves, I understand, were content with it. It was just making sure that all three corners of the triangle, the appellant, the council, and Natural England, felt the same way about it, and they do. Yeah.
Right. One other question: do I need to go and see this mitigation land? I know it's not very far away, is it? It's just down the road a little.
I'd suggest that you do so, just so that you can see it and make sure that there's not some obvious point that's wrong about it. It's very close by. You don't need to go onto it. I don't think you can see it from the lane.
I don't think I need to do that. Okay, that is fine. So I don't have anything more as far as the unilateral is concerned. Are there any issues that either of the main parties have or wish to draw to my attention?
No, sir. I just, unless it's not obvious, you've obviously got Mr. Wood's proof on the mitigation land, and you've heard what Mr. Warren very helpfully said. Obviously, the reason why you don't have a proof from us on that, unless that's not obvious, is of course it was agreed ahead of the inquiry and was dealt with. It was agreed before the exchange of evidence. So that's why there's not more from us on that issue, just unless that's unclear. Unless you need more on the background, I think we would need to get the officer who was dealing directly with the discussions to assist much further on that. But I think a fair summary by Mr. Warren as to the points.
No, I think I'm satisfied with that. Okay, good. Well, let us then turn to conditions. I'm going to
bring Miss Charles back in at this point. Forgive me for interrupting, sir. I'm going to bring Miss Charles back.
And I'm going to ask Miss Page to deal with it from our part, if I may.
Fine. Yeah. So I'm going to be working from the list in the addendum statement of common ground, which to all intents and purposes, I hope anyway, because I made my notes on the conditions that were listed in the original statement of common ground. The only difference between the two, as I understand it, is that the first condition, which lists the relevant plans, has been updated to include the amended plans for the flats. I think that's right, isn't it, Mrs. Page?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, jolly good. Okay.
Sorry, can I just double check? Mrs. Page, didn't the council make a couple of very small contextual changes really to a couple of the other conditions throughout, but they were fairly minor points?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, there were a couple of very minor changes in relation to policy wording and that sort of thing, but very minor changes. Are we going to go through one by one, sir?
I was intending to, yes. Although
that's fine.
I have comments only on some of them, but I think it's probably
Thank
best
you.
if we proceed through those. So if there are any contextual changes, well, I think probably then what I ought to do is work from, I'll make a note for myself to work from the addendum list of conditions, since those will include any small contextual changes that might have been made. Okay, righty-ho. So condition 1 is just a list of the updated plans. I'm fine with that. In fact, I'm fine until we get down to the issues to do with landscaping. We have a standard landscaping condition, which is condition 7, which is that all planting, seeding and turfing in the approved landscaping details should be carried out in the first planting season, etc. Fairly standard. What I couldn't find there was what I normally expect to see, which is a condition relating to what to do should any of the landscaping die or be removed within a period, normally 5 years. My question to you is that an omission? Should such a condition be put in? I would normally expect that to be done, or is it covered somewhere else that I haven't managed to spot, such as the Section 106 agreement?
Just having a quick look, it looks like it may be an omission, and yes, it would be normal to have a, should any planting die or be seriously diseased or whatever, to be replaced within the next planting season.
Mrs. Charles, would you have any objection if such a condition were to be added?
No, I think that's standard practice. I can't see any particular objection to that. Can I make a suggestion that it's added to condition 7 rather than becoming a new condition? Just so that the numbers don't jump around too much, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't think. Let me have
Not
some.
a strong point, just a suggestion.
No, I understand, but sometimes it's better to try and keep discrete issues discrete and just renumber everything from then on in. Okay, thank you very much. My next was looking at my attitude to conditions is that we always seem to try and put too many on. So wherever possible, I try to either simplify, get rid of, or combine. So one issue I noticed on getting to condition 15 and 16 is that they really seem to touch on the same matters. They're both to do with limits on the hours of work, of demolition, and then delivery of construction materials. Seems to me that those really are both aimed at largely the same thing, and in actual fact the hours of conditions to which those activities would be restricted are the same. So my suggestion was just, do you have any objection if those were to be combined?
I think that that's acceptable. We normally have them separate, but I can't see any issue with combining those.
Okay. Mrs. Charles?
I see no particular concern about combining them. Seems sensible.
Thank you. Turning to to condition 17. I see that there is, well, it's, I'm not quite sure what it is. It's the second paragraph, about halfway down, and it's so after the sentence that starts mitigation measures as defined in various BS parts should be used to minimise noise disturbance from construction works. It then goes on to say the procedures for emergency deviation of the agreed working hours. It's grammatically, it grammatically doesn't make sense. And then it goes on to say BDBC encourages all contractors to be considerate contractors. There seems to me to be a kind of almost an informative that's been inserted in the middle of the condition, rather than it being a requirement or on the developer to actually do something.
Mm-hmm.
So my suggestion is it would perhaps be better to take that element out. So the sentence that begins, BDBC encourages all contractors to be considerate contractors. I'm sure it does, but it's not necessary to be in the condition. The other aspect is the procedures for emergency deviation of agreed working hours is rather conflicting with the condition on hours of working, isn't it? It's kind of a tailpiece, which I try to avoid wherever possible. If there were some emergency that required development to be carried out outside working hours, there probably are other mechanisms. It would be a matter for a discussion between the developer and the LPA to agree whether or not to suspend any potential enforcement action, so that they could, I don't know, get on site to avoid flooding or whatever it might, such extreme issue would be. So again, my preference would be for those type of tailpiece condition sentences to be omitted from the condition. Does that make sense to you? Do you have any objection if that were to be done?
It does make sense. Would it perhaps be better as an informative, or do you not think that that's required at all?
I don't deal with if informative
Okay.
never appear on appeal decisions.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, sir, can I just seek clarification then? With that condition, are you suggesting that the condition ends in the middle where it says minimise noise disturbance from construction works and finishes at that point? About halfway down the middle or the second paragraph.
Yes, that was my.
Okay, thank you.
I was suggesting. Yes, at that point.
Thank you.
Condition 18. Development not occupied brought into use until the LPA certifies demonstrating that sufficient sampling of imported material has taken place and it's free from contamination. Was it the intention that earth or spoil or packing of any kind was going to be imported into the site? Mrs. Charles, perhaps that's a question for you.
It possibly is a question for me, but not one that I can be certain of an answer. Not that I'm aware of. I can't think of any particular landscape works or anything that would warrant it, but I can't be certain on that point.
I can understand the need for some earth remodeling within the site in order to get gradients on roads and drives and the like, but certainly I can see nowhere that within the application that there was any intention of importing spoil. Now, assuming that is the case, really that condition is unnecessary. It would fail one of the tests in paragraph 55 of the NPPF, and even though maybe one department in the council has suggested it would be a good thing, I really don't see that it is it's necessary.
Possibly a fail-safe condition, sir.
It has that look about it, doesn't it? Okay. Would you have any objection, Mrs. Page, if I do consider that condition to be unnecessary for it to be admitted?
Would it be acceptable to you if I just clarified with the case officer sort of at lunchtime or something, just to confirm that there wasn't any evidence of material coming onto site?
Yes, that would be most sensible. Yes, please, if you'd do that. The same applied, well, no, not the same. Condition 19, again, it's an issue of whether or not it is necessary. This is a policy that sort of requires studies to be carried out relating to contamination. My understanding, it's an agricultural field. I haven't seen any evidence or any history of other uses on it. So again, my question would be, actually, is it actually necessary for these particular purposes, for planning purposes? Again, Mrs. Page, perhaps that's another one that you could ask the case officer, just in case they have some knowledge that we don't know about in terms of previous uses. But if there hasn't been any previous uses, and I see no evidence of it, my initial view is that that condition is also unnecessary.
Could I just, with agricultural use, clearly there can be the use of chemicals, that sort of thing, and it is quite typical for our environment and health officers to recommend where an agricultural use has occurred that we do have that condition added to any permission. But I can, of course, go to the case officer and just get them to clarify that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, if you will, I'll if there is a reason for it that you can convince me there is, then by all means I'll reconsider that.
Thank you.
Condition 21, no development above ground floor slab level to commence until construction statement meeting water efficiency standards. Understand that bit. However, there's a tail piece that's been added that unless otherwise agreed in writing by the local planning authority through a demonstration that this requirement can be, this sustainable water use can be achieved on technical or viability grounds. Again, it's recommended practice for inspectors for us to try and avoid using tail pieces because it can avoid the condition biting when perhaps other interested parties think that it should. So
Yes,
unless there is
agreed.
a reason for including that, my preference would be to strike that element of the condition out, but to retain its the remainder of it. Is that something you'd be happy with?
Most definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can I just clarify that condition then finishes after less per person per day and the rest of it is taken out? Or do we keep the final sentence in?
Yes, the final sentence would need to be kept in.
The development shall be carried out. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Condition 22, I have a note against it. I simply didn't understand this one. So it's no development above ground floor slab level to commence until a statement of how the development will be of a high quality of sustainable design, to include reference to the layout, design, and construction of development, efficient use of natural resources. What is it requiring, and why? What is its purpose?
Again, I would just clarify, I haven't drafted this condition, but clearly I will give my comments on it. The council has declared a climate emergency, and we are trying to ensure that developments are sustainable and of high standard of design, which that's the aim that we're trying to get to.
And that's quite understandable. But it seemed to me that this is effectively it's addressing matters that are already addressed in the layout, in the sense of orientation of buildings, trying to make an efficient use of land. It seems to me that as a condition, it's too vague to actually. I can't understand what it is requiring a developer to do, and while its purpose is or its intention, I can understand. It seems to me that is dealt with in other ways through the design process. So again, unless I've missed something, my view is that this doesn't meet the test set out in paragraph 55, and I would normally strike it out.
Having looked at the other conditions and the sort of what is achieved through the other conditions, I think I agree that condition is not necessary.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting towards the end. Condition 27 is one which requires a construction method statement to do with parking, loading, management of construction. It seemed to me that one was similar to condition 17, which does a similar job in that that's requires a construction environment management plan. It seemed to me that the two really are aimed at doing the same thing, and those could quite probably be combined, or perhaps 17 altered, such that it takes on board anything that isn't mentioned or isn't additional to condition 27. Would you have any objection if that were to be done?
No objections to that, no.
Okay, and the same applies to condition 28, where it's a fairly standard one to do with method wheel cleaning. I think probably what has happened is various departments in the council have come forward with their own version of something very similar. This I recognise from a highway authority. So again, I suspect it can be just combined for simplicity into condition 17, condition 27 and condition 28 can all be combined into one. Would you have any objection if that were to be done?
No objection.
Okay, thank you. And condition 29, the gradient of the drives should not exceed 1 in 12. My comment there was, is there going to be any conflict with the approved plans? I wouldn't want to have a condition setting a requirement that can't be, that the plans aren't able to demonstrate.
Can I suggest, could I suggest that Karen Charles answers on this, because it was agreed, and she knows the site layout far better than I.
Certainly, as I think my understanding is this is a standard condition with a 1 in 12 gradient. I see no reason why we couldn't comply with that, with the layout that we've got.
You're happy that it doesn't conflict with the actual plans. There isn't any parts of the scheme where you're going to be going above 1 in 12. I have to say, it's not a condition I've come across before, actually. Maybe it's standard for
I think from our point of view, sir, I don't think it's necessary. But we're happy for it to be retained if you feel it has any benefit.
I'll have a think about the issue of is it necessary.
And may I go back to our the case officer at lunchtime just to get her to clarify?
Include that one, by all means.
Thank you.
Yes.
And similarly, so I'll check as well.
Okay. And then my last comment is on condition 32. And this is just a question about wording. Let me read it. Notwithstanding submitted landscaping proposals within 2 months of the commencement of development, details of additional planting around the southern balancing pond to prevent balls entering the area shall be submitted to the LPA. Actually, it needs to have a bit more wording to anyway. It then goes on to say the development should proceed in accordance with the details which are approved. I mean, I understand its purpose is to get some planting so that little Johnnies are dissuaded from wandering into the lake. But it seems to me that you're never ever going to prevent balls going into it. I think it's been well designed in the sense that it's got sloping banks, so if somebody does fall in, they'll just be able to walk out, probably a bit more bedraggled than they wanted, but nevertheless they'll be out. It requires a bit of tweaking to make it clear about what is being done when, and that the planting should be retained. Would you have any objections to those tweaks? And in fact, I will perhaps add to that: is this something that could also be combined with a landscaping with a landscaping condition anyway, since it is to do with landscaping?
I think from my point, sir, I think it could be and combined with the landscape condition. I believe it was added specifically to address concerns raised at committee around the sort of safety and the concerns around the kickabout area and proximity to the Suds Pond.
Okay.
Because it only really relates to the one adjacent to the kickabout area.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. I naturally that makes sense now. But it's a condition that's been added to address an issue that arose in the committee. That's helpful. It perhaps could be, in retrospect, better combined with the main landscaping plan. Okay, those are the points that I had. As I say, relatively small matters. Are there any other issues that have arisen as far as the conditions are concerned since the list was agreed from either Mrs. Page or Mrs. Charles? No, you're happy with that. There's no further conditions that have arisen during the discussions we've had over the last few days. So there's nothing to add or to take away there. Something sitting in the back of my mind that I haven't got to. No, I think that's everything. So, Mrs. Page, I think we were going to await. I quite understand you need to ask some questions and then come back to us. Turning to the programme, we're obviously ahead of schedule. My view is that it would still be better to stick with closings on Friday morning. That will give the advocates this afternoon, if you wish, to use working those up and addressing, if you can, issues to do with the written submissions on the issue of costs as well. That would be helpful. Rather than us all come back this afternoon just to hear what Mrs. Page has to say, may I suggest, Mrs. Page, if you're available, we do that first thing on Friday morning rather than this afternoon. Would that be okay?
Yes, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, that's good. Okay, well, that's, I think, then where I'm heading. Is there any other issues or any housekeeping matters that either of you two gentlemen would wish to draw to my attention? On these?
No, sir, not from our part. Thank you very much.
Okay.
No, sir, neither from me. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. Well, on that basis, then, my intention is to adjourn until Friday morning, so tomorrow morning at 9:30. We'll hear from you, Mrs. Page, briefly to start with, and then we will hear closings from counsel and then the appellant. Good. Thank you very much for your attention today. Inquiries adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.